In a remote part of the strike cruiser, the Silver Scepter, lay a meditation chamber, a quiet sanctuary for a solitary warrior. The dim light filtering through its viewports created an atmosphere of peace and humility. The beams of light, like the blessing of a merciful god, fell upon the polished metal floor, creating an otherworldly glow. The walls of the room were adorned with intertwining patterns depicting scenes of battle and worship, marking the glory of the Imperium and its victories. In the center of one of the chamber's walls was a stunning painting, a mosaic of precious stones of various shades which impressed everyone with its beauty and mystery. In the middle of this room, on an artfully crafted pedestal, stood an altar to the God Emperor, made of noble metals and adorned with gemstone inlays. A pale blue flame dancing in a small brazier filled the chapel's air with the scent of incense and holiness. The candles glowing around it melted slowly, as if stopping time, just to give the praying warrior peace and tranquility. An Astartes, clad in silver-patterned armor, had been kneeling before the altar for a long time. His face, focused and reverent, was illuminated by the pale light coming from the brazier. His eyes, full of faith and devotion, looked into the endless depths of space, seeking answers and support from his master. While one of his hands gripped the hilt of an ancient sword, the silence and holiness filling the ancient hall penetrated the heart of anyone who had ever entered it. In this sacred place, the Space Marine found peace and strength, preparing for the battle that awaited him beyond the starship. The Astartes here was an outcast, yet he had secluded himself from his brothers to protect them from a terrible evil. Besides, solitude was nothing new to the Marine, and helped him gather his thoughts. Voluntary exile helped him strengthen his faith and reflect on his future and past. However, the only thing Garran Crowe almost never thought about was his origin. For it, like the former lives of other Grey Knights, was unimportant and kept in the strictest secrecy by the Ordo Malleus. If you like what the station is doing, like its work, then support us on Boosty. The odd half of our lore videos comes out right there, as well as a bunch of roleplay content, unique roleplay sessions, backstage, and audiobooks. All this and much more, chosen by the subscribers themselves, is already waiting for you there. Among his brothers, Crowe was considered a warrior with an impeccably pure soul, immune to any temptations that chaos might entice him with, and a living martyr, for on his shoulders lay a huge burden, much heavier than his brothers bore. As Castellan of the Purifier Order, Crowe was tasked with guarding the Order's most dangerous relic, the Black Blade of Antwyr. This demon sword first caught the attention of the Grey Knights at the end of the 37th millennium, during the Ecclusiad War. The first to discover it were the Apostles of the Blind King, who found it in the ancient temple of Antwyr, a cursed place dedicated to a wild and heretical god. This sword possessed a monstrous power that allowed its owner to control anyone who could see the blade. The sword corrupted one of the king's apostles, and he, subjecting legions of heretics and madmen to the sword's will, led them to war. Only the intervention of all 8 brotherhoods of the Grey Knights allowed them to destroy the apostle possessed by the sword. However, the sword itself vanished without a trace before the Grey Knights could claim it. The Black Blade returned 3,000 standard years later, but the Grey Knights, warned by the prognosticars, were already waiting for its appearance. On the moon of Tethys, the Battle Brothers managed to seize the blade and kill its new host before the sword could completely possess the mortal's body. After the blade was brought to Titan, the Grand Masters of the Grey Knights debated for a long time what to do with it, and since they couldn't destroy the sword, after lengthy discussions, it was decided to hand the sword over to the Purifiers, as only they possessed enough spiritual strength to resist the corruption and ignore the malicious whispers of the demon trapped inside. At the same time, some Grey Knights suspected that the sword was actually something more than a demon-possessed weapon. Perhaps the whispering voice inside Antwyr is a fragment of an ancient god, and the curse brought with the sword will remain in the order forever. One way or another, over the centuries, the Black Blade fell into the hands of chosen champions of the Brotherhood and was passed from one purifier to another, until Garran Crowe came to possess it. The sword passed to Crowe from Castellan Merak Gavilan, who fell victim to treachery on Sandava II. The Purifier Order was sent to this planet to banish the Slanesh demon Mene Salach, whose invasion had been foreseen by the Grey Knights prognosticars. After the Grey Knights landed, the Black Blade of Antwyr, which had failed to break Gavilan's will, possessed the mind of the planetary governor, and he, cutting the Castellan's throat, allowed the blade to escape. Only through Crowe's efforts and sacrifices was the Black Blade returned to the Purifiers and the demon defeated. However, the victory was only a respite for the new Castellan, as by becoming the new owner of the cursed sword, he took a massive burden upon his shoulders. During all the time Crowe has owned the sword, many of his brothers have noted more than once that he seems to be the only one immune to the blade's influence. Although it is known that Antwyr speaks to him and tries to corrupt his soul, the previous owners of the blade, though they valiantly resisted its influence, unlike Crowe, experienced physical pressure from the sword that gradually exhausted them. In addition to guarding Antwyr, all Castellans, including Crowe, recorded every word of the demonic weapon, as they hoped that in its lying words, some forbidden knowledge or the key to destroying Antwyr might slip through. The Grey Knights began to notice that lately, the Castellan goes nowhere without his sword and always keeps his hand on its hilt, preventing the blade from escaping. Crowe had to resort to such measures because of the weapon's constant escape attempts. The longer the Castellan owned the weapon, the more clearly he realized that Antwyr was trying to escape its prison by any means available to it. If previously, Garran often wore the sword behind his back or kept it on the wall in his personal cell, now he had to constantly wear the Black Blade on his belt. Otherwise, it would start slipping out of its scabbard the moment the knight lost sight of the weapon. And if in his personal cell, the escape attempts could be considered futile, on the battlefield, the sword, vanishing from Crowe's scabbard, would immediately find a new owner, and subjecting them turn them into its slave. Therefore, except for the pure-souled Castellan, no one is allowed to touch the sword, not even his purifier brothers. Over time, Crowe realized that to ensure the safety of those around him, Antwyr must be under his constant control, which ultimately led to Garran having to use it in battle as well, unable to wield any other weapon. Outside of battle, Crowe spends most of his time in isolation in the Hall of Purity, constantly training and reflecting on the curses the demon sword heaps upon him. Despite the fact that for many years he silently endured Antwyr's insults, shielding himself from it with contempt, lately he has begun to think more and more about how to destroy it. The sword, in turn, misses no opportunity to break its jailer, using various tricks. At first, it tried to subject the Castellan, fighting his mind for years, hoping to break the psychic defense of the Emperor's chosen warrior. However, when it became clear that Garran would not yield, Antwyr began to use a different tactic. It offered the Grey Knight unprecedented opportunities and power, and despite the fact that the Castellan is still coping excellently with his burden, the sword's promises are turning from vague offers of power into increasingly specific ones each time. Due to supervising such a dangerous artifact, Crowe is sometimes away from numerous wars, only occasionally embarking on secret Grey Knight missions, but even then, he is separate from the rest of the Astartes, keeping even his Purifier brothers at a distance, who are not allowed to be near him for long, either in battle or during flights. However, the mental struggle with the Black Blade reaches a completely different level when the Castellan is on the battlefield. The sword sometimes recognizes the demon champions the Grey Knights have to fight, and sometimes offers help to both the warp creatures and Garran. Thus, if Garran's opponent is a demon neutral or friendly to Antwyr, the Black Blade will willingly tell the warp entity everything about the Castellan's fighting technique and his weak points. But in the case when the Castellan fights an old enemy of the entity trapped in the sword, the blade offers its help in the hope of seeing Crowe settle old scores for it. In turn, Crowe never pays attention to the sword's attempts to help him, knowing that even if it tells the truth, its price might be too high.
However, the Castellan often takes the whispers he records to the prognosticars so they can gather useful data from them. Because of his incredible strength and such long resistance to the sword, some Grey Knight Grandmasters believe that Crowe carries one of the purest samples of gene seed, and that this sample was able to awaken in Garran something of the Emperor himself, because, unlike them, the Castellan has a completely unique view of the world. The Purifier does not see chaos the way others see it. To him, the warp is like a cool and deep river, beneath the surface of which shadows flicker, in which the Castellan sees demons. Otherwise, how to explain that Crowe resists the influence of one of the most powerful chaos artifacts in the galaxy with such stoicism, and for so long, and is able to single-handedly stand against demons that sometimes only several squads of Grey Knights can defeat? Something similar happened in the year 888, when the Grey Knights had to face Skulltaker, a herald of Khorne himself. As soon as the prognosticars reported the demon's appearance to the Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights, he personally chose Crowe as the commander of the strike group that would go to reclaim the planet. The battle for the world took place in the ruins of a spaceport, where the Emperor's chosen warriors, finding themselves in an improvised arena, saw Skulltaker standing in the middle of a mountain of severed heads. Crowe realized that only he was capable of banishing the demon, and, taking advantage of his pride, challenged Skulltaker to a duel, giving his brothers time to banish the lesser demons. Before the champion of Khorne attacked, the Castellan used a gift presented to him by the Grand Master specifically for such a battle. It turned out to be a vial of crystallized tears of the Emperor. As soon as Crowe broke it, they immediately illuminated the ground around and weakened the demon champion. However, even with such an advantage, Crowe could barely cope with the demon's onslaught. At the same time, the Black Blade begged Garran for release, promising to slay Skulltaker as soon as Crowe freed it. Parrying the attacks of the ruthless demon, the Castellan also had to fight a battle inside his mind, holding back Antwyr's pleas and curses. For several hours, the Herald of Khorne and the Grey Knight fought each other, until the demon began to notice that his material form was beginning to weaken. Focusing entirely on killing Crowe, Skulltaker ignored the actions of the Grey Knight strike group, who at that moment were cleansing the planet and sealing the rifts in reality. In the end, the Castellan managed to gain the upper hand. Promising revenge, the demon vanished, leaving Crowe alone with the mocking laughter of the Black Blade, celebrating victory over its old enemy. Reflecting on his fate, the Castellan felt the ship's engines reduce power and realized that the battle was not far off. Loosening his grip for a moment, Crowe reached for the helmet standing on the altar and immediately felt the increased pressure on him. However, a moment later, he realized that Antwyr was only distracting him while focusing on someone else. Squeezing the hilt, he briefly curbed the demon and realized who it was reaching for. One of Garran's brothers knocked on the thick armored door of the hall, letting the Castellan know that it was time to deploy. Crowe waited until his brother had walked a sufficient distance, loosened his grip again to put on his helmet. After which, regaining control, he rose to his feet and, full of determination and unyielding faith, moved toward the exit.
You're goddamn right.